Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Zoologist Podcast. I'm your host, Jake, and today, as always, we'll be talking about all things animals and learning more about the incredible creatures that inhabit our planet. Now let's get ready to get wild. Today's episode is the 10th episode of the Zoologist Podcast, and I wanted to make it special. So today we'll be learning all about the legendary Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot. Stories of these primates have been passed down by Native Americans for generations. More recently, Bigfoot has become a pop culture phenomenon and an icon of the Pacific Northwest. In this episode, we'll learn the history behind the legend and discuss whether or not this mysterious ape actually exists. Let's dive in. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for hopping on to today's episode. It is a very special one, the 10th official episode of the Zoologist Podcast. If this is your first time listening, basically what we do on this show is we learn something new about the animal kingdom each week. It could be an overview of a specific animal, it could be a question, something from pop culture, a story from history. Whatever it is, though, it will always center around animals. It'll always have something to do with zoology. If you end up liking what you hear today, be sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite streaming platform, leave us a review, and then make sure to go and listen to some of our other episodes as well. You can get a better idea of what we're all about. Alrighty, now that that's done, let's talk Bigfoot. I am super excited about today's topic. For the 10th episode, I really wanted to do something different, something special. And recently I was talking to someone I know, and they suggested that I do episodes about Bigfoot and other legendary creatures, just as a fun thing, and also because there are a lot of people that find those topics, find that kind of thing really interesting. I was originally planning on waiting much longer to start making these kinds of episodes, but after they suggested it, I figured it would be a great way to make the 10th episode a little more special. So with that, here we are, and I will say, Bigfoot is something that's fascinated me for a long time, so I was really excited to put together today's show. When I was younger, I was absolutely convinced that Bigfoot was real. I used to watch Animal Planet's Finding Bigfoot series religiously because I didn't want to miss the episode where they finally found one or proved that Bigfoot was real. For a while, too, it was my dream to put together my own expedition to go into the woods and look for proof of Bigfoot's existence. Looking back now, I think the reason I was so fascinated by this legend was for the same reasons I think most people are. Bigfoot has become kind of a symbol of mystery, of future discovery. And I think it's the unknown factor to it that draws so many people in and makes the stories and tales about this ape so exciting, so fascinating. But I do think it's fair to wonder, where did this legend begin and how did it become so popular? And most importantly, is there any truth to it? Today we're going to answer those questions, and we're going to tell the Bigfoot story and talk about how it became ingrained into our culture today. We're also going to discuss what evidence we have for the existence of this supposed race of ape men running around the North American wilderness. To start, though, I want to talk about the creature itself. What is Bigfoot? Well, supposedly Bigfoot, which is also known as Sasquatch, is a large, hairy, human-like ape. It walks on two legs, and it can be found throughout North America. Sightings of the beast have been recorded in every U.S. state besides Hawaii and in 9 Canadian provinces. The Pacific Northwest, in particular, is considered to be a Bigfoot hub. California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia account for 1/3 of all documented sightings of this animal. Eyewitnesses put the beast at anywhere between 6 feet and 15 feet tall, or 2 to 4.5 meters for all you metric system users listening today. It's also been estimated that they weigh somewhere around 800 or more pounds, or about 360 kilograms. The name Bigfoot derives, obviously, from their massive footprints. The largest have been measured to be about 2 feet long and 8 inches wide, or somewhere around 60 centimeters by 20 centimeters. The thing is, legends of huge human-like apes aren't new, and they aren't even exclusive to North America. Cultures around the world, from South America to Asia to Australia, they all have their own stories about enormous humanoids wandering through remote habitats. In traditional folklores, these creatures are often spiritual in nature. They might be the protectors or guardians of the lands that they inhabit. They're often depicted as being hostile as well, something that should be avoided or something for travelers to be wary of. The Himalayan Yeti is probably the most famous of these. Quite honestly, I think the Yeti might deserve an episode of its own someday. It has a very fascinating backstory, a very fascinating history. But for now, suffice it to say that stories about these animals date back thousands of years. In fact, when Alexander the Great conquered the Indus Valley back in 326 BC, he demanded to be brought a Himalayan Yeti, but apparently he was told that the creature could not survive at low altitudes, so he didn't get to see one. Besides the Yeti, other examples of legendary apes include the Almasty of Central Asia and Russia, the Yeren of China, and the Yowie of Australia. As for Bigfoot itself, various Native American tribes have told stories or held beliefs about these creatures for centuries. In fact, the name Sasquatch is the anglicized version of a word in one native language that means wild man or hairy man. An ancient pictograph found in a cave in Northern California appears to depict a group of these creatures, which suggests that these legends go back hundreds of years and maybe even thousands of years on the North American continent. These animals go by many different names, and they may be friend or foe, depending on which tribe you ask. Now, among European settlers, reports of Sasquatch date back as far as the 16th century, when Spanish explorers told stories of los vigilantes oscuros, or dark watchers, in modern-day California and Mexico. The first instance on record of someone finding Sasquatch footprints was David Thompson, a British-Canadian fur trader who, back in 1811, described his party coming across footprints that were 14 inches long by 8 inches wide, or 35 centimeters long by 20 centimeters wide. Each of these footprints had 4 toes, and each of these toes ended in a short claw. When Thompson first wrote about the incident, he stated that the tracks belonged to a very large bear, but later in his life he would write, "Reports from old times had made the head branches of this river and the mountains in the vicinity the abode of one or more very large animals, to which I never appeared to give credence. These reports appeared to arise from the fondness for the marvelous so common to mankind. But the sight of the track of that large beast staggered me, and I often thought of it, yet never could bring myself to believe such an animal existed, but thought it might be the track of some monster bear." There would continue to be sightings and tales of ape men in North American wildernesses throughout the 1800s, but even back then there was no shortage of hoaxes and false reports like there is today. For example, one newspaper, the Daily Colonist, reported in 1884 that a gorilla or ape had been captured near Yale, British Columbia, and as it turned out, no such creature had been found or existed. But while these stories did circulate during the 19th century, it was really in the 20th century that Sasquatch went from local legend to pop culture phenomenon, and it really all stemmed from a few specific incidents that occurred during that century. One of these was in 1924. A group of gold miners were camping by a gorge near Mount St. Helens when they claimed they came across a group of huge human-like apes. One of these prospectors supposedly shot and killed one of the apes, which rolled into the canyon next to them. That night, the creatures came back for revenge. They attacked the cabin that the prospectors were staying at. They threw themselves at the walls. They tore a hole in the roof, and they started throwing boulders and rocks towards the men, knocking one of them unconscious for several hours. Forest rangers later went back with the prospectors to investigate the scene, but I guess they were unimpressed. They couldn't find the body of the ape that the men had claimed that they'd killed, and they said the rocks in the cabin could have easily been placed there by the men themselves. Nonetheless, the story quickly caught the public's attention, and the gorge would be given the name Ape Canyon because of what had supposedly transpired there. Similar to this story, and also in 1924, supposedly, a man by the name of Albert Ostman claimed that he was kidnapped by a Sasquatch while he was camping in British Columbia. Apparently, while he was in his sleeping bag, he was picked up and carried dozens of miles by this creature until he reached a small valley where he was kept hostage by a family of them for about a week. He wasn't able to escape until the animals ate his chewing tobacco and became violently ill. During the commotion, he was able to run away. He wouldn't tell this story until years after it was supposed to have happened to him. In 1957 is when he finally shared his story with the world because he feared that nobody would believe him. Alrighty, I think that's a good place to take a quick break. We will be back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Are you a brand new podcaster, hoping to share what you're passionate about to whoever's willing to listen, but you aren't sure where to start? Navigating the logistics of your podcast can be confusing, from tracking growth to getting your podcast on the biggest platforms like Apple and Spotify. That's why I use Captivate. Captivate is a podcast publishing site that's user-friendly and offers everything you need to fulfill your podcast's full potential. They'll help you publish your podcast to all of the most popular platforms, as well as help you track your growth through daily, weekly, 28, and 90-day download numbers, as well as the averages, so you can see where your podcast might be flourishing or floundering. What's more, they'll help you with promotion and advertising. They offer free courses on how to start and run the perfect podcast, and they even throw in a free website with your subscription, completely customizable to fit your podcast's personality. You can sign up now starting at $19 a month, and you'll even get a free 7-day trial so you can decide whether or not it's right for you. Sign up today at thezoologist.net/captivate, and what's more, you'll be supporting my show. Captivate truly is a podcaster's best friend. Hello everyone, and welcome back as we continue our discussion about the legend of Bigfoot. We've talked about a couple of incidents that supposedly happened in 1924, about a group of gold miners that were attacked by apes in their cabin, and also a man who claimed to be kidnapped by Sasquatch. These two stories would become legendary, but the two events that really pushed Bigfoot into the international spotlight both happened several decades later during the 20th century, in 1958 and 1967. Both of them also happened in Humboldt County, California, which is just kind of an interesting side note. In August of 1958, a man named Jerry Cruz was working for a local logging company when he came across huge footprints after clearing away debris with a bulldozer. When he reported these footprints, he found out that many of his co-workers had come across similar footprints, and pretty soon these loggers started blaming acts of vandalism and other disturbances on whatever monster had left those prints. Eventually, two reporters picked up on the story, Betty Allen and Andrew Gonzoli. They both worked for the local Humboldt Times newspaper, and on October 5th, 1958, they ran a story about the monster, referring to it as Bigfoot, which is apparently how the loggers had already been referring to the animal. This was the first time that the name appeared in print, and I guess that this story kind of took off. It became national news, and it's really how the name Bigfoot became popularized, was from that article and from this event. Almost 50 years later, in 2002, was kind of a bookend to this story. The family of one Ray Wallace, who was one of Cruz's co-workers, he passed away that same year in 2002. After his death, they admitted that the whole thing had been a hoax. They revealed a large collection of wooden feet that Wallace had used to create the footprints at the time. Nonetheless, the incident put a spotlight on Sasquatch and kind of turned it from this local legend into something of a national sensation. While the 1958 incident launched Bigfoot into the public eye, it was 1967 that truly changed the whole Bigfoot discussion forever. This was in October of that year, and two men, Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin, witnessed and caught on tape what they claimed was a female Bigfoot in a clearing in Humboldt County, California, next to Bluff Creek. Even if you've never heard of the Patterson-Gimlin film, I guarantee you that you've seen it before, or at least a spoof of it. It's definitely the most famous piece of evidence for the existence of Sasquatch, and it might be one of the most famous video clips of all time. The clip is about a minute long. It starts with the camera kind of wildly shaking around before it finally stabilizes, and you get a clear view of what looks like a big hairy ape striding across a clearing in the woods. Naturally, as you would expect, this film has been heavily scrutinized over the decades that have followed, both by believers and non-believers. It's also, to date, the most compelling piece of evidence that we have of Bigfoot's reality. Many say that it's obviously a man in a suit, and in fact, one man, Philip Morris, claimed to be the one that sold Patterson and Gimlin the gorilla costume used in the video. Another man would come forward years later and claim to be the one who actually wore the suit in the film, and even went on television and passed a lie detector test regarding this claim. This hasn't deterred believers of Bigfoot, however. Many claim that the movements of the animal could not have been made by a human, and that there are anatomical features present that could not be replicated by a costume. For example, when the animal walks, apparently you can see its muscles moving in the legs and the back, and there are several muscle groups that are visible when you zoom in on the ape. In any case, whether it's true or not, to say it caused a stir would be a massive understatement. The film has become Bigfoot's defining image, and it really kicked the craze over Sasquatch into high gear in the late 1960s and into the 70s. So now that we've kind of reviewed a very brief history of this legend, let's talk more about the evidence. What proof do we have for the existence of Bigfoot? Besides the Patterson-Gimlin film, and besides the eyewitness accounts, many people have come forward with photographs, videos, and recordings. In fact, those recordings might actually be some of the strongest pieces of evidence that we have for the existence of Bigfoot. They include whoops, grunts, yells, shrieks, basically any mysterious animal call or noise that can't be identified as a known animal. On one occasion, these recordings included a mumbling of some kind, and this is where things get really interesting, because apparently this clip was picked up by a retired naval cryptologic linguist, and he was able to identify the sounds as a language of some sort. He said it was definitely not made by humans, and it definitely wasn't made by any known animals, such as a deer or a bear. People have even sent their own recordings to him, trying to replicate the mumbling, but he's been able to easily tell that these recordings are made by people. So, very intriguing evidence for the existence of Sasquatch. Besides recordings and photographs, though, other evidence of Bigfoot's existence include the thousands of documented footprints. These footprints are often casted in plaster to be studied later on, and there are some that claim to have found dermal ridges on some of these footprints, which wouldn't be impossible to replicate in a fake footprint, but would be extremely difficult to imitate. Others have claimed to find Bigfoot nests deep in the woods. They've even shown these nests to primatologists who have identified them as belonging to some kind of ape. Despite all this, however, the strongest evidence of Bigfoot's existence to date is still considered to be the Patterson-Gimlin film. So, taking that into consideration, it probably won't surprise you to hear that there are few within the scientific community who recognize the existence of Sasquatch, and the skepticism is matched by the general public. According to one survey, 13% of U.S. adults believe that Bigfoot is a real animal. Many say that the evidence that's been collected is not very compelling, that it can be easily explained, and what's more, no DNA evidence has ever turned up of Bigfoot, let alone a body or remains of any kind. And it's been argued that if this animal had a population large enough to breed and perpetuate the species, it wouldn't be able to hide its existence for this long, that some kind of DNA evidence would eventually show up. It also doesn't help that the best piece of evidence that we have for this creature's reality is a video that was taken over 50 years ago. The fact that nothing better has come up, even with the advances in technology that we've had over the past several decades, has caused some to understandably be skeptical about the whole thing. Nevertheless, there have been and still are researchers and scientists that not only believe in the existence of Bigfoot, but that actively search for and study these animals, that insist upon their reality. For example, back in the 60s and 70s, one naturalist named Ivan T. Sanderson was a huge proponent for the existence of Bigfoot and really the existence of ape men around the world. Grover Krantz was another one. He was a professor of physical anthropology at Washington State University, and what was interesting about him is that he actually risked his entire career by espousing the reality of Sasquatch. He was mocked and, I don't want to say persecuted because that's a little strong, but almost kind of persecuted for his belief in Bigfoot. Apparently, he would spend nights in the woods with a shotgun, literally hunting Bigfoot in order to prove that it was a real animal. Even to this day, researchers such as Jeff Meldrum and Cliff Barrickman continue to search for and study Bigfoot, as well as the evidence that we have of its existence. Whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, you do have to take into account the evidence that does exist, including the many eyewitness reports, the videos, the recordings, the photographs, the footprints, just to name a few. As we've already seen, many of these are likely hoaxes. We've already seen the capability for people to fake these kinds of things, but it would be unreasonable to think that all of it is being faked. Some say that Bigfoot sightings could be another animal that's being misidentified. Bears, for example, can easily be mistaken for large humanoid creatures. When they're on two legs, black bears can stand up to 7 feet tall, and grizzly bears are even taller, well within the range of 6 to 15 feet put forward by witnesses. It's also been noted that bears look eerily human when they're walking on their hind legs, and it's been proposed that bear tracks can easily be mistaken for human-like footprints. This theory is actually validated by the fact that areas with a high concentration of Bigfoot sightings often correspond with known black bear habitats. Now, this theory doesn't explain all Sasquatch encounters, because there are some sightings that occur outside of known black bear habitats, but it may help to explain some, if not most, of reported Bigfoot confrontations. Another theory that's been put forward is that Bigfoot is descended from a population of extinct apes called Gigantopithecus blacki. These apes were indeed massive. They were native to Southeast Asia, and they died out over 300,000 years ago, but it's been proposed that some of these animals crossed the Bering Strait land bridge thousands of years ago and began to populate the Americas. Furthermore, there are some who say that Bigfoot may be the missing evolutionary link between humans and apes. However, there are several problems with this theory. For one thing, no Gigantopithecus fossils have been found in the Western Hemisphere, and because the only known fossils, the only fossils that have been found, are pieces of jawbone, we don't even know for sure that these animals walked on their hind legs. What's more, Gigantopithecus blacki is supposed to be only distantly related to human beings, so to say that this creature is a missing link between humans and apes is simply not realistic. Some of the more bizarre theories include that Bigfoot is an extraterrestrial or supernatural in some way, which I guess would definitely explain how it's so elusive, but I mean, it's a theory that I personally don't subscribe to. So, based on all the evidence and the arguments, could Bigfoot be real? Well, you never want to say never, and you can certainly draw your own conclusions based on all of the evidence that is out there, but personally, I feel like based on what we do have, Bigfoot is more likely a myth, a legend that has captured the hearts and minds of people going back hundreds of years when Native Americans were the only ones sharing stories about these mysterious primates. Even if Sasquatch doesn't exist, though, I think it's fair to say that what these animals have come to represent is what makes them truly legendary. Bigfoot in many ways has become a symbol of finding freedom from society, being in tune with nature, and gaining respect for the natural world. One last fact I want to share before we conclude, because it just adds so much to the craziness of what we've talked about so far today. Apparently, the FBI has had a file on Bigfoot since 1976, a database where they've gathered eyewitness accounts and evidence of the monster's existence, and they even did a DNA test on what were supposedly samples of Sasquatch hair that were sent to them. The result? Well, the analysis confirmed that the hairs did not belong to an unknown primate. Instead, they belonged to a deer. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Zoologist Podcast. I say it every episode, but this has been one of my favorite episodes to make. I had a blast feeding my Bigfoot obsession this week. If you'd like to learn more about this legendary beast, go ahead and check out the research links in the show notes. Those will either be on my website at thezoologist.net or in the description for this episode, depending on which platform you're using to listen to this. If you liked what you heard today, once again, I want to invite you to subscribe or follow us on your favorite streaming platform. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, so check us out and make sure to never miss a thing going on with the Ultimate Animal Podcast. Thanks again for listening, and as always, have a wild day.